Hey guys, I'm in the studio today and I'm working on some on-white images for a client of mine. It's a rather complicated setup that I've done for several years for this same client, and I do for at least one other client as well. If you notice, this is an older bottle, but it should be a multivitamin that I'm receiving. I like to kind of get everything set up before the bottles get here. But if you notice, the bottle's really shiny. It also has some like grayish lettering watermark right here in the black area. And a lot of gold trim and stuff like that throughout the bottle. So it's a little bit of a complicated bottle. What I do on the lighting setup, just to kind of run you through, and you'll see it in a second, I have one light as the background light that just sort of makes the scene white. I have two strip boxes on either side that I shoot through diffusion panels that I create a gradiated light on the outside edges. I have a fourth light that I use off of a diffusion panel that's in the front that creates a gradiated light off the top of the bottle and kind of goes down a little bit. And then my fifth and final light is a snooted gridded polarizing gelled light that I use to really pop the label. It really allows those watermarks to pop out, and it gives me a lot of true color on like the different colored labels and stuff like that. I'll go ahead and start getting the setup started, and then every now and then I'll just sort of stop and talk about some things that I've done to evolve the shoot over the last few years. Okay, so everything's roughly in place. I've got my 5 lights. I've got my diffusion panels. I've got this arm set up so that I can put a diffusion panel in the front. There's a few things other than this that I'll have to get for the setup. But this is the part where I have to kind of go through and just sort of fuss with everything a little bit. The way that I remember this is well, at least in the past, what I used to do is I kind of know the setup really well, but I would just sort of redo it, and I would redo it, and then I would redo it. And eventually I got smart enough that I started writing everything down. And a few years ago, or a year or so ago, I created this little book right here, which is sort of my studio log book, which is like a detailed layout of every shoot that I can have. So this is just a sample page where I can write down the client's name and the camera settings. I can draw a schematic. I can put like the height of the camera and the angle of the camera, what all the light setups and settings were, and I can have a little space for notes. So instead of me reinventing the wheel each time, I just go to the page that has this, and I follow along my little schematic, and I make sure everything's as exactly like this as I possibly can, and that gets me really close. So when the client has a new product and they put it on their website, it looks exactly like all the other products that they have on their website, and there's no incongruency between one product and the next. first things first, the angle of the camera lens and the height of the camera from the floor. One of the things I like to use is an angleometer. What I do is I just place the angleometer on the top of the lens, and I adjust the angle of the lens until it's right. It's supposed to be 9 degrees upwards. So there's a little red thing here that I set on 9 degrees, and I just keep adjusting the camera until it's 9 degrees up. The height of the lens is set from the bottom of my lens. It's supposed to be 33 inches from the bottom of the lens to the floor. So once I get the angle set, and you should set the angle first, because if you set the angle second, you will have to reset the height each time you adjust the angle. You can just put this down and then lower the camera to the right height. The next step is putting the bottle on sort of my stand that I use. As I said at the very beginning, what I like to do is I like to get the product up just a little bit so that the tabletop surface doesn't create a shadow on the bottom edge of the bottle. So what I do is I have a little plexiglass block, and I put a piece of foam core board on top of that. Just so that it doesn't move around, I use a little bit of sticky tack, and I put it on all 4 corners. Put that on there with the white side up, and then put on all 4 corners on the bottom of the block so that the block doesn't move around either. Up next, after I get this done, is that I measure the distance between here to here, and I make sure the block is in the center, and then I have to measure it forward backwards so that it is the appropriate distance to the camera. I don't like to use a lot of this because I don't want to raise it up a whole lot. I just want it to not move around. And the cool thing about using a piece of foam core board is that eventually this will get kind of gross and dirty and nasty. Instead of me having to replace some gigantic thing or something weird, I just have to replace, basically change where's the foam core board or cut a new piece from something I already have. And I've got a new surface, like totally white surface. One of the things I feel like I've got to be the most meticulous about is the height of the camera, the angle of the camera, and the distance from the camera to the subject. When I didn't have everything written down, I used to spend a lot of time with an overlay of one of the older products and being able to look at a live view of the new product and kind of moving the camera all around until I've got them married up and they kind of were mirror images of one another, laying right on top of each other. Since I've done the measurement thing, I really don't have to do that. I'm basically 99% there. If I can just sort of center the product in the frame and do all that sort of stuff, it's really just a matter of cropping it with the right amount on the bottom and the right amount on the top, which I have a little overlay that I still use for that. So I'll talk a little bit about this, even though I think it's a little bit silly, but cord management is not my forte. But one of the things I've been doing over the last few years is instead of stringing the cords all over the place, I put the surge protector basically in the center underneath the table. That way there's not cords going all over and it's sort of got a central place and I'm not stepping over them constantly. There's another thing that I've done for years and years with my cords is that I put electrical tape of different colors on the ends of the cords on both ends. So if I'm trying to figure out which cord's going where, that the background cord is the red one and that the one right here next to me, number 3, is the yellow cord, I know exactly which cord to unplug and plug in or mess with or do whatever with. It's really helpful, and it kind of keeps things really organized for me. But other than that, I just sort of shove this guy up underneath the table so all the cords are going inwards and not laying all over the place. A lot of the stuff is dialed in, the light power output's dialed in, and everything's getting into place. There's a few things that I've got to do before I call it well set up. One of them is to put a piece of diffusion right here. I want to talk about that. A few years ago, I used to use these PVC diffusion panels that I've made. But more recently, I've made a piece of diffusion panel out of a piece of foam core. I kind of left a little bit extra on the corners for some structural rigidity. I just duct taped it with white duct tape on the sides, and I cut a hole in the center for the camera lens to put through. It's a lot lighter and easier to put in set than the larger PVC ones. I really like this a lot. That's one of the things I've changed over the years. Besides this, I've also got to put some little, what I call light troughs, which are just pieces of Savage plastic that I put in the corners to kind of avoid any dark shadows created by where these side panels and the front panel meet. After that, I have some flags, some black pieces of cardstock that I put behind the bottle to create nice, crisp, dark edges on the back. What I used to do is just use the fact that there's a gap between the side panels and the back panels to create that sort of darkening, but it really wasn't very consistent, so I now use a lot of flags. And the last thing that I'm going to have to do is just sort of dial in this polarizing gel on the front of this snoot so that it doesn't create any unwanted reflections or highlights in the bottle. I've noticed that there's little things that you wouldn't necessarily think about that kind of affect the overall look and consistency of all the images. And one of those things is the angle between the diffusion panels on the side and the strip boxes on the side. So one of the ways that I keep the angle really consistent is that I use an A-clamp, and I just clamp it on the top corner. And I line the edge of the A-clamp up and the corner of the strip box with the diffusion panel, and that keeps the angle really consistent so that the gradiated line or graded sides gradiate basically the same amount. If it's a little bit less, it creates less of a graded line. If it's a little bit more open, it creates more of a graded line. So I want that really consistent. I just put this A-clamp there and do this on the other side, and that manages to even it out on both sides and keep it consistent. So a few more things and then I'll be all done. Before I get to those last few things, I'm going to just sort of talk about this really quick. If you notice, this arm right here isn't a full-size arm. It's actually one of the smaller arms, and I've got a piece of PVC pipe on there. That's for two reasons. First off, it's a little bit lighter and easier to kind of manipulate right here between the camera and this whole set. And I like that aspect of it, but also because this makes this whole pole white. And actually a third reason is because it's a little easier to put A-clamps on the top of this PVC pipe instead of those thinner arms. So all those reasons, I kind of just like to use this one. I do have another arm. I could use that one. I just like to use this. Once I get that on there, I just move it up and down and match the hole on the diffusion panel with the lens right here. After that, I put this light right here into place just behind my camera and slightly to my left and the product's right side. I then rotate the gelled snoot until I marry the gel and the polarizer that's on my camera and get rid of any unwanted highlights that appear on the bottle right at the top. So it lights the product, but it doesn't create a glaring highlight on the top that I'll have to take out and retouching. There's usually like a little bluish kind of color from the gel, like a little spot of blue, but it's tiny in comparison to what's left if you don't use a polarizing gel. So I've got everything set up. I've done a test shot and it looks really pretty good. I'm still waiting for the bottles, so this is just sort of me pre-lighting, waiting for the bottles to come in, and we'll get to that as soon as we can. There's a few things I wanted to mention. First off, this is a lot to do just for an on-white, but I will say that a lot of times I use a very similar setup, basically the same, when I'm doing some stylized beauty shots of the same products. So if the client just wants a sort of a gradiated background, all I've really got to do is just switch around the background and everything else can stay the same. If they want something else that's similar but simple, I mean, it doesn't require too much adjustments, and I've got a good starting point for this. But speaking of starting points, know that this, despite the fact that I mentioned that I like to measure everything out and I like to get everything as exact and as close as possible to the original images, this is also just a starting point too. If I've got to make small, minute adjustments between this and the new bottle, then I make those adjustments. I don't consider what I wrote down some dogmatic law that can't be adjusted to. When I get the bottles in, I'll show you what those look like, and then we can just sort of put them on set, and then all I've got to really do is just sort of make small rotations as I go around the label and shoot the front, sides, and back of the bottle. So I got my 2 bottles in today. As you saw when I opened up the box, they came in packing peanuts, which is probably my least favorite packing material. There's sort of the ecological reasons why I don't really like packing peanuts. Hopefully I can use them to ship something off myself. But there's another reason for plastic bottles. Plastic always creates a lot of static electricity, and those packing peanuts on this white or on this black bottle, it's like a magnet. It just sticks all over it. So what I'll do to prep these bottles is I'll take off this little plastic cover on the cap, and then I'll wipe the bottle down, and I'll also hit it with an anti-static brush that I have, and then I'll get rid of most of the sort of static, clingy little bits of packing peanuts that are on there. I'm also putting my fingerprints all over these too, so I'll have to wipe those off as well. Once I get my computer hooked up to the scene, I just put these in place. What I end up doing is I do front, obviously. They want backs, which is the supplement information right here. But I also always shoot this text information right here, just sort of as a backup, in case they ever come back to me and ask me for that. I've already got it for literally every bottle I've ever shot for them. First off, taking off these little plastic labels. After I get everything cleaned, you can see that there's sort of like ridges on the caps, and I just usually grab it on the cap. That way I'm not putting any fingerprints on anything, and I try to grab it on the sides too, so that I'm not putting anything where I don't want it to be. But let's get it cleaned up. If you also notice, they send me 2 versions of each bottle. What I like to do is go through and look at the label. One of the things that I like to check is to see if the label on the back, where there's a gap, if it's level right there, then I know the label itself is really level. And then I just look to see which one has the least marks and which one is placed on the bottle in a good spot. So sometimes it's a little high or a little low, and I'll pick that bottle. So I just kind of go through each of the bottles and sort of pick the best one, and that'll be the one I use for all the shots. So I'd say both of these are just a hair off as far as level, but I don't think it'll matter for the photographs. So I'm gonna look at the fronts real quick. So these are basically the same. There's a little bubble on both of them around this center piece of gold right here. So I'm gonna have to take that out either way. The only thing that I notice a little bit different is than the one right here, there's a few less scratches in the plastic right here. So I'll probably just go with this one just for that. That'll just save me like a fraction of time in Photoshop. So with this one, I would say this one's probably put on the bottle a little bit more even than this one, but this one, the edges of the label and the plastic portion of the bottle is just a little bit rougher on this one. So I think I'm gonna go with this one. I don't think that the difference that the label is off is gonna really matter in the photo. And I'd rather not have to clean up all the little marks around the edges and in the plastic quite as much, especially in that gradiated light area on the edges, which is on this one. So got the plastic off of this one. Now we just got to clean them up. I promise I'll stop touching the main portion of the bottle in just a second. This is also an anti-static cloth, but I use it to wipe everything down. But then I've also got this anti-static brush that I kind of just sort of brush last second and then when I'm on set. All right. A few things I've noticed about the first shot. I need to lower the center light that's going gradiating off in the center of the label just a little bit. The setup is actually set up for taller, skinnier bottles, so I just need to bring it down so that it gives a little bit brighter highlight at the top of this smaller, shorter bottle. The other thing is I need to adjust the cards in the back so that they're more even and they're creating an even black line on the outside edge. And the other thing I needed to do was, oh, I'm forgetting myself. Oh, I need to level up the camera. It's super not level. I realized when I was sending the e-comm images to my client that they had also requested to have the gummies outside of the bottle as well. So I ran back up into the studio. I had everything set up for the on white still, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Opened up the jars and put all the gummies in place and took a quick picture of both the libido gummies and the sleep gummies. The ones that are still up are the sleep gummies. I didn't have a chance to film everything since I just wanted to get it to my client really quickly. The lighting is exactly the same for the bottle on white, except I removed this panel right here. So it's got a little bit less light coming from this light right here. But that's not that big of a deal. I was able to kind of lighten it up. This gets at the front plenty light enough. So not that big of a deal. So if you can see, there's one gummy that sort of pulled forward a bit, and that's so that it gets a little bit of rim light from these side panels. Along the edge, it gives a nice little kind of highlights on either side. I wanted it to kind of be a bit triangular and a bit of a mound. So I've got one on a piece of little foam right here. I've got another one on some sticky tack so it doesn't fall too far forward. This one's just sort of leaning a bunch against everything. This one's just so it kind of creates a triangular shape a little bit on the one side, as is this one. And this gummy's sole purpose is just to fill in the gaps so you don't accidentally see any of the foam or the sticky tack. But I think it looked pretty good. What I did is I did essentially the exact same layout for both sets of gummies, and on one I flipped it to the other side of the bottle, and one I left it like this. So I think it turned out really good. So that is officially it. The images are sent. I'm going to start working on the stylized beauty images next. Thanks so much for watching the video. Have a great day. Bye.